Insight development. All right. Well, my first insight today is on the topic of wisdom. And wisdom, it occurred to me one time that, people think that being old is synonymous with being wise, but that's not necessarily the case. It's just that old people, have tend to have learned their lesson. They tend to have paid more attention to life and extracted some more knowledge and experience out of life. And then, they think twice before making the same mistake. And that's I think the feature of wisdom is restraint, knowing when to hold back, knowing when to not say something. And so, but it's not just old people that are wise. And I've met lots of young people that have this characteristic of restraint, of reflection, of insight, of introspection. So it's not the domain of being old. It's just it belongs to whoever's paying attention to life. Now, you seem to be a good candidate for that. Do you consider yourself to be wise, Larry?
I'll leave that to the audience to decide. But I agree with you that it is so. In some sense, people equate wisdom with old age for exactly the reason that you described. That it's given a large number of amount of time, you would make mistakes and you would learn from those mistakes. But of course, it is possible for one to reason about why maybe one action is less wise than the other, and it's in that philosophy where in which wisdom can be grounded in someone that's much younger than someone that is much older. So, for example, doing something that you'd consider unwise in your youthful years. Maybe you partied a lot and you drank too much booze than you could handle. I mean, this is something that a single individual as a young adult can reason by themselves, right? And so then that will be equated to wisdom in that sense in which, insofar as the one could restrain themselves, as you mentioned, I think quite rightfully describe wisdom succinctly in a way that I
But is
hope.
is is wisdom, is becoming wise a subjective experience, or is it just when you finally understand a universal truth, that's something that's true for everybody? And so, is that what wisdom is? It's just sort of catching up with what was already there, and you were just blinded to it in your youth.
Yes, I think in parts, yes, it is some awakening in some sense. It almost feels like a spiritual awakening in which you're now seeing things more clearly than you otherwise would have because your goals were narrow as a youth. But of course, it's possible for you to expand that circle even as a youth to look at the things that really make life meaningful and then filter the essence of knowledge, which is essentially wisdom, to filter from all the sea of information that we have and to see what exactly would stand the test of time. And that again,
Yeah.
it can be an empirical question that can be answered.
I'm glad you used the word spiritual, and that's why I chose this image. That's a Buddhist monk, and he's meditating in a cave. And believe it or not, I belonged to a Korean Buddhist monastery in Toronto, in northern Toronto, for 8 years.
Right.
And for 8 years, I was a member of this monastery, and I taught the monks English. And
Oh,
in
nice.
return, they let me be part of the monastery, and I slept there once a week, and I took part in every aspect of their life. And the head monk, my main English student, was a guy like this who spent 10 years meditating in a cave
Wow.
before rising up to kind of become the head monk of this monastery. But 10 years in a cave
That is.
meditating. And when a Korean Buddhist meditates, you know what they're doing?
What are they doing?
They're trying to escape from their own thoughts. They're trying to
Exactly.
get out of their own head and enter the mind of nature or God's eye, and to see
Right.
and to have universal wisdom and permeating through them, knowing everything. So when you're at one with everything, you got to get outside of yourself first. And that's the
That's true.
challenge, right? And so
Yeah,
it does
yeah.
wisdom. You said it's almost like an awakening. Does wisdom require for us to kind of forget ourselves, or to put ourselves aside and have a
Exactly.
larger, more universal perspective?
That's true. That's true. At the core of meditation is to detach yourself from the thoughts in your head, what it feels like, what you think it feels like to be yourself. Because when you close your eyes and you try to sit in silence, you realize that you quickly realize if you're not an expert meditator that it's almost impossible to escape your thoughts. So in some
Yeah,
sense, you're a slave to
that's
that
true.
thought. And so in meditation, you are relinquishing this attachment of the self to the thoughts that are within the self, and then it's just
Yeah.
pure experience. And it is,
When it comes to meditating, like the first thing you have to do is learn how to sit straight like that all night
exactly,
long. And to think, how can you escape your own thoughts if you keep feeling a pain in your back or if you're
exactly.
uncomfortable, and it's very, very, very difficult to do.
It is.
But I
It is.
admire, but I remember this monk of mine, my friend, and one day I'm going to visit him because he lives in a monastery in Korea now that has 500 monks living in it. And one day I plan on going there and having my own personal monk be my guide. But
Yeah.
the way this guy was, the way he looked at you, the way how calm he was, it just oozed wisdom. And
Right.
he was like so non-judgmental, so peaceful, so slow moving, because he didn't want to hurt a single mosquito, and I was squashing the mosquitoes and he was brushing them away, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's
They
something
do ooze. I think it's a core characteristic of people who meditate that they ooze. They just, as you say, they just ooze calmness and uh serenity, actually.
kindness. Yeah,
And
yeah,
kindness as well. Yeah.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah. And so it makes you think that it's if it's possible, because another thing that my students never believe is I never saw the monk sleep. He never slept because this sect of Koreans, they were chanting when they meditated all night
Mm,
long, singing, and he was at the head of it. And so he would go from dinner to the temple, sit up
mm.
straight, chant all night long,
Yeah, right.
never fall down, never close his eyes, and
Wow.
then go straight to breakfast and do a hard day's work in the fields, building,
Mm,
hard man's work, and then back to the temple. I've never saw that man put his head down. I've never seen him tired or fatigued. And
right.
so I thought, is he doing something in this
Is
meditative state that
mm.
supplants the need to sleep? Do we really need to sleep, or do we just need the thing that sleep provides?
You should be right. I see. That's an interesting way of looking at it, actually, because if you think about what exactly happens during sleep cycles, is that we're just flushing out certain toxins that are in our brain. For example, our body enters this metabolic state that is not previously achieved during the waking state. So maybe as you say, meditation has all of those characteristics that are superimposable to sleep cycles. And so in which case, then one would not need to sleep. But it could also be alternatively be that it's such a practice of his, so much so that now even as he chants, he is doing this thing that we call sleeping. But then the software that runs on this autonomic cycle just keeps going and he keeps chanting, and so it almost as though he's in a waking state, but he really is
Yeah,
sleeping.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
possible.
Probably. In any case, it just makes you think that if he can be like that because of meditating, then maybe we should all be
Right.
meditating at least
Yeah.
to some degree. All right,
Yes.
next topic. Next topic. Ready for this one?
Yes.
I chose this for both of us. Being African.
Oh.
You know, when I tell my students in the class, I said, in the vocabulary development, we come across the word unprecedented, which means never before, first time. And I always ask, what made Barack Obama an unprecedented president? And everyone said, oh, everyone always says, because he was the first black president. And then I always say, I'm sorry, I don't see color. but my point is, I always say Barack Obama's mother was white, fully, fully white. He was half black, half white, but
Right.
nobody sees the white in him. They
Right.
only see the black. So my insight is that people see what they want to see. And look at me. I'm half Egyptian, half Austrian. But when people look at me, they ignore the Egyptian part. They
Egyptian, right?
really do. They treat me like I'm a white man. And when they see my name, then they take a step back,
It's like,
because
whoa,
then you add all the Islamophobia to the equation.
right.
So, what has your experience been like being African in Canada?
Ooh. I must say that being from a predominantly black country, Ghana, where that was all I was exposed to, coming to Canada for the first time in 2021, it really was it was a weird experience to not see people like myself everywhere I went. So it took some adjusting to, for example, and in Ghana, and I think in Africa at large, we're more collective in mindsets, and I see that the staunch difference in Western countries, especially Canada, not especially Canada, but for example, Canada, where it's more individualistic and it's not so much so that you're your brother's keeper, which I guess there is some utility in doing that, but that is one staunch difference between the two I've seen.
So you're saying that in the African society,
Right.
people are more, there's more solidarity and people are more
Yeah,
together. The communities, they eat together, they dance together, they spend time together, they get to know each other. And
exactly. The
here we
downside of
can live beside our neighbor for 20 years and never even know their name.
right, right. I suppose the downside of that is that like now everybody's in your business in that kind of setting. Whereas if you're in Canada, then your business is your business. So there are downsides and trade-offs to this kind of collective living slash individualistic.
Have you
Uh,
committed any cultural faux pas coming from Africa to here, that because
right, so
doing things, yeah?
I actually did my due diligence because I was quite nervous of doing something like that. So, but yeah, so by and large, I don't think I have stepped on any cultural toes as far as I can conceive of it. But just that's only because I read up on things to not do and to
Oh,
do.
good for you. Good for you. When I was younger, when I went to Korea, I was stepping on every cultural toad. I had no idea what I was doing the whole time. Anyway, um, yeah, I mean, a lot of, I would say the average person in North America, when they think about Africa, they have a very, very narrow, uneducated view.
You're
And
right.
I noticed being from Egypt, my neighbor, when I talk to him, he thinks of Egypt as being like the Taliban state. You know what I mean? And he does
Yeah,
it's like my aunt is a university professor in Egypt.
you did
My
right.
family, they go to the club, that they live better lives than my neighbor.
You're right.
And I always say to him, you're the most radicalized person I've ever met. Never mind any Egyptian.
Right.
You.
True. True.
And so,
Yes.
do you find
Yeah.
that people mischaracterize Africans, and that you have to spend a lot of time explaining people that it's not true, and maybe breaking through some misconceptions?
No, yes, I definitely think, but I don't fault them too much. It's like again, it comes back to the media issue and how the media portrays African continent. I mean, for example, the things that make headlines would not be that there's this beautiful place in Africa or there's this place that is peaceful. For example, it's mostly you hear stories about the lack of water and food and vaccinations, which I mean they are present in I would say in unreasonable quantities, but not so much as is being portrayed in the media, for example. And there are really beautiful scenes and huge cultural heritages in all of Africa. I can only speak for Ghana, but in Ghana, it's just the sheer mix of culture, of hospitable people, great food, and great sceneries, actually, great buildings and all of that. Just make it a place worth living. And it's definitely not, as you see on the media, where it's just like starving children all the time. It's definitely not the thing that is prevalent, at least in Ghana, as
Well,
far
I
as
know what you mean, because I grew up with the Arabs being vilified in every movie that we watched growing up, and every bad guy was an Arab with a sword, and right
right.
from the Indiana Jones. But and so that's the vision that everybody has about Arabs, and
True.
and people
True.
make snide remarks. Um, my wife has had nurses at the workplace call me a terrorist because they found out I'm Egyptian. So, oh, you're a terror, ha ha ha.
Oh my.
It's a, you know,
That's
anyway, I always tell my neighbor, I said, you know who the number one terrorist group is in America? Like officially documented by the FBI and CIA. It's the radicalized right-wing middle-aged white man. They're the most likely to commit domestic terror than
right.
any cultural group. And anyway,
That's
so
interesting.
I just find that people waste a lot of time being racist. People waste a lot of time trying to cement, like, find their own superiority, and they really, I think there's so many more things that bind us together.
Right.
Like for recently with that neighbor of mine, he's obviously on the right side of the political spectrum, and
Mm,
I'm more towards the left of the political
right.
spectrum. But I just recently I said we can meet in the middle when it comes to the billionaires, because
Right.
we don't need to fight against each other. We need to unite to fight
Right.
against our common foe, which is the
Yeah.
billionaires.
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
are you proud of being African?
Certainly, yes. I think it's giving me a worldview that is not typical. It's like I've had the best of both worlds in this case, and it could only have been the case if I had this original shared history with Ghana, with Africa, and I yeah, just the pervasiveness of the just pure culture is it just enriches the experience, honestly.
Are you
And so
planning on going back to Ghana after being educated here?
yes, at some point, yes. At the core of my intellectual pursuits is also to improve my country of origin. There are certain, I mean, the part of the main reasons why I immigrated to Canada for my education was because, well, I thought of all the things I'm interested in, and how could I be in the frontier of those intellectual pursuits? I quickly realized the answer wasn't Ghana, and if I
So
wanted trailblaze,
what kind of position awaits somebody like you once you're done all of your education, once you have all those diplomas? What kind of job awaits you in Ghana? Are you going to be in position to climb the political ladder and maybe get into government someday?
my aspirations do not have the government in mind, but I think for someone like me, you'd probably want to break new ground if you want to go back home. And so maybe establishing I mean, there is a good research institute in Ghana called Nobuke, but if you want to do research of the scale that's I mean it's impactful globally, you must have the information accessible to all the prominent scholars in the world and be trained by them essentially. And so if you want to go back, if I want to go back to Ghana, I would have to have these requisite knowledge and skills, which I'll be able to use to scale the research front of Ghana. And
All right, let's go through the